Hello and welcome to this yet to be named channel where I'm going to work on presenting various studies in relation to meaning and motivation. And today I'm going to start looking at a study about learning from failure, and that is this one. I can start by reading this summary or introduction, if you will. Growing evidence reveals that whether in classrooms, at work, or people's personal and social lives are difficult to learn from, as in failures. Traditionally, researchers have focused on self-threatening natures of failure as the culprit for why people struggle to learn from their past blunders. Here we show that beyond emotional barriers to learning from past failures. As an example, failures is unpleasant. There is also cognitive barriers, failures that seem uninformative. These barriers arise when people fail to achieve their current goals during goal striving, and when they decide whether or not to pursue the goal at all, goal setting. We discussed these interventions that promote learning from failure to overcome the distinct psychological barriers at each stage of this pursuit. It's worth mentioning though, which says here, it is funded by IBM, which is International Business Machine. I found that stands for, which is interesting. So they likely have their reasons for this, so keep that in mind. Jumping then into my presentation. So yes, this is a learning from failure, and I have just here set up the most interesting quotes as a summary, in a sense. So this is a meta-study that means they are looking at studies that already existed and putting them into a context that makes sense in ways of finding out why people have a hard time learning from failure and looking at the solutions towards that end from research already have been done. And they look at it as a two-step process, starting at goal setting and then goal striving, as in deciding what goals to set and working towards them. And they are referring to various studies that shows levels of failure that some may see as success and others see as failures. So there's different perspectives here, but despite all these variations, there is broad consensus among human beings that failure is an unpleasant experience. This you can relate to the fact that we often are motivated by positive feedback more than negative, seeing as the negative feedback is like almost we experience like a punishment, while positive is a reward which is more engaging in a sense. And mastery is always also something that we are motivates us more, so that's why this is kind of a hard thing to see as useful, if you will. So yes, they're looking at goal striving and setting and barriers to success. What aspects that prevent us from looking at failures as something useful. And as such, unpleasant as failure may be, the threat of failure is inherent in most goals worth pursuing. And of course, this is just the same thing that's behind the risk factor of everything. Risk versus reward. The higher risk, the higher reward, in most cases, that is. But there is always some outliers, so to speak. So, and these are, in this case that is pointed out, some seek out failures to learn from them in goal settings. This is not the norm though. But yeah, there is some people that kind of set out to, they more or less seek out failure. Their goal in part is to fail, just to test out what doesn't work and learn from it. But these are outliers, so to speak. But that actually works better in this context. So let's look at the main barriers that they are focusing on in this research. The first one is emotional barriers from learning, and that could be ignoring negative feedback, avoiding finding out potential negative results, which is kind of cognitive dissonance theory, where we seek out ways to kind of look at ourselves as a good person despite the negative things we do. Like say, if you're smoking and you know it's bad, but like a friend of mine told me that you're hardening your lungs, making them more resilient by exposing them to danger. I'm not sure that's correct, but yeah, that's why I'm a good person, in a sense. Or I'm lazy, but I'm relaxing and charging up to do something later. Therefore, I'm a good person, even though you're not doing anything. And then there's moral standards and sense of self-threats is also ignored and avoid fear of losing self. Yeah. We are in many ways we look at negative feedback as a threat to self, and we don't really want to fail because we want to look at ourselves as a good person, in a sense. So, the other one they're looking at is cognitive barriers to learn from failure. One being expecting success with confirmation bias. This is like we are often imagining how we want the outcome to be, and then when we don't get that, we get discouraged. And seeing as we don't like negative feedback, we don't value the fails, testing what fails, because we aim for the success, so we should only focus on that one. And the fear of punishment. This could be from schooling, being that when we go through school we have the tests and there is a lot of focus on the grades. And I can imagine most people here that went through school remember that there was some people that kind of, if you got bad grades, you were put into a box of not smart, if you will. And then if they're bad enough, then the teachers might pick on you more, in a sense, but to, in a way, try to get you to improve, but you get that negative attention, in a sense, from the rest of the class, which doesn't really help. And then there's a tendency to seek out confirmatory evidence emerges in a variety of contexts as well. So we only look at what confirms our expectations as opposed to looking at all of the results and learn from them, which is also a form of confirmation bias. And they also look at ways to overcome barriers, of course, because why do research without looking at solutions to a problem? That's kind of what research is. When people interpret their successful actions as a signal of commitment, it tends to increase their motivation. Furthermore, when people interpret their failed actions as a sign that they have insufficient progress, it tends to increase motivation. That's the case for some people, but not all of them. But this is a better way to look at it. Kind of like there is, this relates to meaning. As with meaning, there is commitment. That is kind of what I'm working on and my focus area, where you can see that a lot of research shows that if you have a meaningful goal in mind that you work towards that has a lot of meaning and importance to you, then the obstacles on the way is less of a mountain to climb, if you will. Another quote: one clear way individuals can overcome barriers to learning from failure is to reinterpret failure. The way that the research frames this as a better way is referring to some studies, the third person's perspective on the situation as a way to more easily be able to learn from failure. Self-distancing, as in looking at the situation of the failure after the fact, that is, from a third person perspective, like looking at it from above, like you're not part of the situation. And if that is too hard, you can look at other people's mistakes and learn from them instead. It is useful, but in NLP there is another way to look at it. And there is what they call reframing. And then we reframe failure to be feedback. Because whatever we do when we test something, the results we could consider feedback. Being it success or failure, it's still feedback to learn from. So if we consider failure as feedback, then it's not a negative thing. Then it's easier to look at it as something to learn from. It's a result that tells us what works and what didn't work, and then we can improve from that standpoint. That I think is a better perspective to take, because it fits in more scenarios, so to speak. And it also states that people learn best from failures when the threat of their ego is removed, which is effectively achieved by having them learn from failure from others. And yeah, this is kind of the reason why some people talk about removing or destroying or not be controlled by the ego, so to speak. Seeing as the ego is in the way, this is referring to the fact that many people, or some people, I don't know how many, but tend to identify with their knowledge, identify with what they've learned, what they've done relates to skills, and if that knowledge or skills in some way is connected to not working or being incorrect, then they connect to that as an attack on themselves, more or less. So that's why the ego is in the way of learning from that. And like, my performance is failing because I failed at this, as opposed to this didn't work, how can I improve? So, attributions. That's kind of how we connect one thing to another as an interpretation, which is something they look at as well. And the locus of control. It is pointed out that changing the attribution attached to the situation, example, not succeeding can be attributed to be feedback, can be used in in some ways to gain control of the situation with mentally choosing to act and attribute consciously as opposed to letting external factors control the situation. Building on this work, this was kind of a summary of a lot of things that were pointed out. Building on this work, referring to a study in the text, defined two broad mindsets that shaped how individuals perceive failure: a growth mindset and effort as opposed to fixed mindset. Yeah, okay. There was a lot more to that quote, but I kind of summed it up in my notes, that is. So, yeah. Some people look at the effort as the feedback, like the more they work on it. Others look at it as, I'm growing from this, and that is better ways to attribute the feedback, so to speak. If you want to read this study yourself, it can be found on the link that you can see here. And the full name, as I did show you, is, yeah, you can kind of see it here too. Hope you learned something from this and found it useful. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next video. I see many people that lack motivation as a result of not enough meaning in their lives. You might wonder what meaning has to do with motivation. My bachelor's paper shows that what people consider meaningful is also what they consider important. And if something is important enough, we will do it. This tells me that meaning is important for motivation. Tom Bailu, among others, have stated, quote, "Humans are meaning-making machines." My goal here is to help people learn more about themselves and help them find a long-term meaningful goal in life. So if you have not found your interest and struggle with motivation, you might want to visit my website at whori.org and see if this is for you. Which is here. You can either contact me here or look around and see if it's for you, and if it still is, you can contact me here. Or if you want to know more, you can click this link to schedule a call. I am located in Norway, and if you want a physical meeting with me, that can be arranged, and my Norwegian website is kvenreg.org, which looks more or less the same. And with that, I wish you well on your journey.